Anybody have any comments or questions they'd like to make? Yeah, in the back.
Understood that the VA helped you a lot immensely with the course of your life, but at what point do you think you, as a veteran, as also as a human being, did you take some level of accountability or direction in your own life where you were like, okay, I don't have suicidal thoughts and this is my life and I'm going to continue to where you are today?
I think it's a good question. I think it all, like any recovery, I think it happens over a period of time. I couldn't say when the moment was. I know that the second that they admitted me that day from room 423, that my life changed. I felt understood. I felt listened to. I've been through, again, 5 years maybe of private therapy. People want to talk about my mother. They want to talk about. Nobody wanted to talk about Vietnam, and even if I brought it up, and I didn't know that it was Vietnam that was at the root of whatever it was that was bothering me, because I didn't know. I mean, I'd never been through it before. I didn't know why I was unable to hang on to relationships. I didn't know why all of a sudden I was unable to hang on to jobs. I didn't know why my last 3 jobs I've been fired from was for anger issues. These were all things that had been way different from the me that went to Vietnam, or indeed initially came back. So it's, yeah, I mean, I take, I take credit for, that which I might take credit for, which was basically being diligent and doing whatever they said whenever they said it. For the first 2 months, I went in and saw a shrink every day. After that, it was once a week. In the protocol, you could not miss a meeting, once a week, for the PTSD protocol. And they put me on, they got my meds, they adjusted that, and it's still, I'm still in their hands. I'm still under psychiatric care. I'm still not as, needless to say, as intense. Certainly under their medical care for still my PTSD, but more importantly, or more sort of lastingly, that doesn't go away, was the effects of Agent Orange, which manifested itself in diabetes, lupus, cancer, among other delights, or not so delights. They, I consider myself very fortunate. I am the tip of an iceberg when it comes to the VA. I am a person who made it in and made it through among the what must be millions who just never got near the place. And a lot of it is because the way we were, for Vietnam veterans, the way we were treated when we got home. When Max was head of the VA, he worked to create something called vet centers, which some of you may be familiar with, still exists today, in maybe up to 100 around the country. And he wanted a place where Vietnam veterans didn't trust the VA. They didn't go to the VA. They got turned away once. I'm not going back, and they never did. Not for weeks, not for a decade, never. And so, in order to sort of get around this, Max created vet centers, and he decided he was going to set them up like Haight-Ashbury help centers, medical clinics, like in strip malls and things like that, city street corners, where the vets could come in and just talk to each other, or talk to other vets, talk to people who understood about this. But the important thing was that it had no identification as anything having to do with the VA. And he was the head of the VA. So no American flags, no identification, this is VA, no nothing, because he knew any vet that was walking down the street that saw a flag or saw a VA or something having to do with it, the vet center would just turn around and you'd never see him again, as happened with the VA.
Okay.
Not long before he died, Max said he considered the vet centers to be his greatest accomplishment in public service. Yeah.
So Jack, there's been so many movies have been made about Vietnam and coming home and Forrest Gump and Born on the 4th of July. And here you lived through all of these things. Did you watch those movies? If you did, how did you react to them? And did it touch you in any way, or or touch a moment that reminded you of the life that you had there?
Well, the first movies were, Apocalypse Now and, the Deer Hunter, among Coming Home. There were some others, but those were the two big ones. And which had no relationship to Vietnam, other than they said it was about Vietnam. I mean, otherwise, there was nothing there. The one that came out that there were two that hit me. One was
Full Metal Jacket.
Full Metal Jacket. Thank you. And the first half, which was about boot camp, was as accurate a portrayal of Marine Corps boot camp at that time that I could possibly imagine. I mean, it was scary accurate, but for the guy sticking the rifle in his mouth at the end. And Platoon, I started to watch once and I couldn't get past about 10 minutes, and I couldn't watch it. And I think it had to do because of betrayal, things like that, were just countered everything I believed from having been in the Marine Corps. So I forced myself one day to finally watch it, and it was hard.
Why?
I think it's because it involves betrayal. I think because it involves not military discipline, but basically military discipline coming apart. And
Are you angry, or you're sad, or both?
No, I said not. I don't think I was. No, I wasn't angry. It made me sick. I think that would be. Is that a feeling, sick? Yeah.
I'll pick up on that and just say, if you had the opportunity to see Ken Burns' series and what your reaction was to that, and maybe you didn't see it, but a lot of different segments and a lot of different thoughts. And also, were there any books that have particularly helped you in your recovery or that you particularly resonate with? And I'm thinking of authors like Tim O'Brien and the things they carried, or anybody else.
Well, Tim was first and foremost. I think I can't think of any. There are the Dispatches and all the books that came out early on, but Tim O'Brien really struck a chord with me. I didn't read that many other books about Vietnam. I love the Ken Burns series. I thought it was terrific. Three of the people that are in it are friends of mine, good friends of mine. One being Carl Merlantis, who was also in Charlie Company with me, who wrote a book called Matterhorn, which was a New York Times bestseller, very well received book. And the other two both had been Marine grunts there about the same time that I had been, and they were terrific. They were articulate. They were on point. I thought Ken. Some people had thought that Ken Burns didn't do enough of this or enough of that, but they probably do that with everything he does. But for me, just where I was looking at it, I thought it was really good. I learned a lot that I didn't know, and I'd say the one book I did read that really made an impact was Way. It was the book about the siege in Way City the Marine Corps was in, and it made an impact because it was beautifully written, and also it was one of the first books that was written with the full participation of North Vietnamese Army generals and troops, and I knew Way. I'd been in Way, just in my back and forth across the DMZ, and so I was sort of familiar with it. Nina and I were there several years ago. We were walking around inside the Citadel where most of this took place, which is a big area. And I would look around, as Nina would attest, and I said, I just can't believe that anybody could pull off an airstrike in this space. The intensity of the fighting that went on there was remarkable. So that's a book I would certainly recommend for being well written. And there are probably others I can think of. Yeah.
I'm sorry. Go ahead. The two books chronicles your whole time. That the creative process, was it easier on the first one, or was it easier on the second, or was it did it just flow?
Way easier on the first.
Way easier on the first one.
The first, as some of you may know, was I wrote 110 letters home to my mother from the time I got to the Marine Corps till the day I got home. And bless her heart, she saved every one of them. In addition to letters from my sister Ruth and other family members. So I had I had a guide. When I started writing the book, Bobby, it was, I wrote it as a what did Daddy do during the war book for my 3 daughters. And then I started filling in the blanks. And geez, maybe they'd want to know more about this person, maybe they want to know more about this. And pretty soon, after a year or two, it became to resemble a book. And then after a couple more years, somebody suggested I get an editor that really might become a book. I worked with just a fabulous editor, and I'd never written a book before, who really, really guided me through. And Loon was 2 years, from my high school graduation until my registration in college. This book was 44. And not only was it 44, but it was a book I swore, I didn't say I'd never write, I swore I would never write, because there was nothing in me, not even that much, that ever wanted to go back to those first 4 or 5 years back and feel the way I felt in different circumstances. I didn't necessarily know how I was feeling at the time, but in retrospect, it was awful. And but I had to. And I think the response to Loon had been so positive from people I'd served with, and I mean, hundreds, if not thousands of people I didn't know who'd served, or were families of people who'd served, that, thank you. I know what it was like for my brother and father. I know, or people were reaffirmed, people that were there. And so I knew that maybe there would be somebody who would, by that same token, benefit from my experience. I felt like I had to write this book. So I started writing it. It took 13 years. When I met Nina on our first couple of dates, yay, those many years ago. 7 if you're keeping track, if you're scoring at home. I had finished it and was ready to be edited, ready to go. And on our first 2 dates, I read it to her. And then I went about trying, looking for an agent and doing what you do. And at some point, she said, "You're just right. You're happy with it, aren't you?" And I looked at her and I said, "Uh-oh. What do you mean?" So I came back a year later and said, "What do you think?" "Oh, it's all right." "Good. Yeah, it's better." A year later. So 5.5 years later, I came back, and she didn't say, this was like 8 months ago, 9 months ago. She didn't say, is it like as good as Loon, is what I was trying to do. I would figure with Loon I caught lightning in a bottle, I'm not a writer, I wrote this book, and how do I duplicate it? And, but she said basically, I can't remember the example, but is it worthy of Loon? Do you think it's a book that can sit on a shelf beside Loon? And at that point, for the first time, I said yes. I thought this book had finally come around, but boy, Bobby, it was hard. It took a long. It was hard.
all those characters you had to reflect on.
Well, and years.
Right, and bring in their lives. So
Yeah.
I guess that was a silly question.
Yes. And there's 9 kids in the Morrissey family. I even talked about them. I mean, when were they born? Where were they? It was, and who graduated from where? I mean, everything was hard, but it came out. Anybody else? Yes.
When you reconnected with personnel from Charlie Company, did you find that they were suffering the same slings and arrows that you were suffering?
Totally. I mean, our experiences were mirrored. If they were a wildcatter in Marion, Oklahoma, or if they were running a deli in Chicago, I mean, whoever they were, their experience was the same. And their experience was the same in the way they felt treated by fellow Americans. The experience was the same in the way they felt emotionally. In this book, I have one of the things I was going to read, but I have a note that we went to one of our little reunions down in Knott's Island when we started getting together. Now there's maybe 8 or 10 of us, and one of the guys, Buck Willingham, came up and he gave me a slip of paper just in his hand. He said, "Here, Janie wanted me to give this to you." And Janie was his wife, who I'd met once at a reunion that year before. And I started to open it, and I thought, well, I'll wait till I get home. So a couple of days later, I'm home, I'm sitting at my desk, and I open it. And the first words, all written in pencil, were, I had no idea. And she was talking about this man that she'd married, who'd then gone to Vietnam. She married him before he went to Vietnam. They were juniors in high school. And the man who came back was different from, and this is 30 years later. She's still married to him, but we had, and then what she talked about in the note was what happened to him when we started getting together. How the camaraderie that we began to share, having had none for all those years, made just such an enormous difference in his life, as it did mine. People came home from Vietnam. You went to Vietnam on a Tuesday, you came home on a Thursday, and you did it by yourself. I came home on a plane load of people from Da Nang. I didn't know anybody on the plane. There were probably a couple of Marines there, a lot of Army guys, maybe. I didn't know anybody. I was home in the airport 2 days after I got out of the field. And so somebody's shooting at me, now I'm home. And no coming home with your unit, no sitting around bullshitting afterwards saying, boy, remember that. All that was years later. There were things that had happened to me that I write about that I had no idea if they were real or if they were just recurring nightmares. I had no idea. I couldn't have, and I found out they were, a lot of them were real, just by the memories of other people and just putting all the knots together.
One last
How would
question,
you-
everybody?
Well, so if I was Barbara Walters, which I'm not, but what was the hardest part of all of this process, right? Was it having to confront the idea that you could write these words in the book? Was it confronting Nina? What's the hardest, most emotional part of this entire process that you've gone through? Because you've talked about it in a very intellectual sort of way, but what was the most emotional part of it that really touched you, that was really hard?
Is it Barbara Walters? I thought you were going to ask me my favorite color. It would come in waves, Mark. I don't think it was. I don't think there was a. Nina may add to this, but it just comes in waves. There could be sometime I am someplace, or I see something, or something triggers something, or I hear a song. I mean, just all the, not so much the old triggers of planes going overhead and cars backfiring, which they don't do anymore, but it would just come in waves, and the waves are lesser now, but it is not all that rare, as Nina would attest, for me, at no provocation as far as she can know, to just start crying. And it's there. I mean, it'll never go away. There's a lot of people. I mean, it's just, and then you think, and I get 10 years older, and I think back, and they were still all kids. They're still 18 years old. They're still 17 years old, a lot of them. They're not, and they don't come back. And 5 more years ago, they're still not coming back. And their parents are dying, and my parents are dying, and life is going on, and they are still gone, and I never got to see any of it. So things that trigger thoughts like that, I think, are.
Thank you.
Does that answer it? Is that along the line?
I think we have one final question back there.
I think you'll write another book.
No.
Not another book about Vietnam.
Nina would like me to write another book. She wants it to be a steamy sex bestseller. She said
Sex and PTSD.
She said it's about time we started making money off it.
I have a question. Can I ask?
Ron,
Let's do it for one final question.
One final question from a cousin, please.
No problem.
From a cousin. Your life is, Jack, your life is taking you to many places. You grew up in Summit, New Jersey. You moved on to prep school age 14 up in Massachusetts, Phillips Andover, one of the best prep schools in the country. You enlisted instead of going on to college, which is what prep school was supposed to prepare you for. You went to Parris Island, you went to Camp Pendleton, you went to Vietnam, you came back home to Massachusetts. But most people might be interested to know that 76 years ago, he was born in Huntington Hospital.
That's right.
And now, 76 years later, he's back in Huntington. So, could you reflect on that?
I had nothing to do with it, but when my first, Nina, as many of you know, Nina and I met online, and we were going through the perfunctory snake dance in the beginning. It wasn't very long. When I realized it, I thought, God, it's so interesting. She lives in Huntington, and because what it meant in my life. And I've been born in Huntington, lived in Northport for how many years, Mike? 6 months. Moved to Summit, never came back again. The only time I've been back to Huntington since was to do a book event for Loon at the book review. It was the only time. So here's Nina, and not only does she live in Huntington, but she was a labor and delivery nurse in Huntington Hospital.
There you go.
So I said, as long as you weren't working that night, this could work. But so now I'm here.